Hello there. For today's video, we're going to be talking about Alec Guinness as Obi Wan Kenobi and why I believe that he's underappreciated as of now. Ever since the prequels came out, everyone's talks about Ewan McGregor as Obi Wan Kenobi, and I feel that Alec Guinness is not really in the discussion when it comes to that character. So today, I'd like to further enlighten people on why I believe him to be underappreciated as Obi Wan Kenobi. So for today's video, I'll be going over the origins of the character, specifically how George Lucas came to develop Kenobi. I'll be going over the production of Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. I'll then provide takeaways from Guinness's performance as Obi Wan Kenobi in the first Star Wars movie, and I'll then sum up by stating the main reasons why Alec Guinness should be further recognized as Obi Wan Ben Kenobi. All right, the first item on the agenda is that I will go over the character origins for the first Star Wars movie. So, when writing the screenplay for the first Star Wars movie, George Lucas envisioned the film to include an old man mentor type character for the others to look up to, the protagonists of the story to be specific. And this was all according to Joseph Campbell's analysis of classic mythology, the hero's journey. He wrote a number of books relating to the topic. A very well-known book he wrote was The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and he wrote a couple others. According to Campbell's mythology, the hero is accompanied by a mentor for a time during that hero's journey. They accompany the hero, and then they depart the story for some reason. This mentor type role in Star Wars was originally going to be filled by a character called General Luke Skywalker. When Luke became the main protagonist of the story, the character of Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi was placed into that role. So a lot of people know that Lucas took a lot of inspiration from Akira Kurosawa, especially his film Hidden Fortress. There's a lot of samurai characters in Akira Kurosawa movies. For Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi, his costume was very much inspired by that old samurai warrior type character. It is very much an extension of Akira Kurosawa's influence, so that makes sense that his costume and his mannerisms and the type of role that Kenobi plays in the story is related back to those old samurai characters. So to sum up these quick character origin notes, the character was very much born from mythological influence from Campbell and Akira Kurosawa. So with the genesis of that really informs what Guinness had to go off on when he created the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi through his performance. All right, now I'll be moving on to the notes I have on the production of Star Wars Episode 4. So when Lucas was casting for the movie, he needed some established names to headline the film. The main reason why he needed an established actor to be Kenobi is that the three main roles of Luke, Han Solo, and Princess Leia were going to be filled by unknowns, so there really needed to be some star power in the supporting roles. We see that with Peter Cushing and Alec Guinness in the first Star Wars movie. There was a notion for Teresa Mifune to play Kenobi. Alec Guinness was a more likely name to be considered, so George Lucas went looking into Alec Guinness's availability. A little background on Alec Guinness's career: he's a very prolific actor. He was in a number of highly successful movies during the course of his career. He was in 7 David Lean movies, I believe. He starred in The Bridge on the River Kwai, which won him an Oscar in 1957 for Best Actor. He played the role of Colonel Nicholson in that film. My favorite performance of his would be as King Charles in Cromwell, which came out in 1971 and co-starred Richard Harris. In September of 1975, Lucas came into contact with Guinness. He approached him about taking on the role as Kenobi. Lucas hand-delivered the script to Guinness. Alec Guinness was initially hesitant about taking up the project because he wasn't a fan of the sci-fi genre, but he found the story to be endearing enough that he had to turn the page to see what happened next. Following the script reading, Guinness had lunch with George Lucas and was impressed by him. He really appreciated the fact that Lucas was a part of this next generation of filmmakers in Hollywood, the new Hollywood era where you had all these auteurs coming in and overtaking the studio era of Hollywood. So after a period of negotiation, Star Wars was greenlit, and in January of 1976, Guinness agreed to play Obi-Wan Kenobi for £15,000 a week, and he would also earn 2% of the film's profits. He will later go on to earn an extra 0.5% for his role as Kenobi. Now, during production, Lucas changed the fate of the character. He made up his mind to change Kenobi's fate when Star Wars was filming in Tunisia in 1976. Since Kenobi was included later on in the drafting process, Lucas had to create plot points in order to make the character useful. Ultimately, Obi Wan Kenobi in Star Wars A New Hope is the vehicle for the film's spirituality. He's not really a pivotal character in the film. I kind of had an epiphany when I was reading the making of Star Wars. Kenobi, after the first handful of scenes that he appears in, he really just tags along with the rest of the characters, and I really can see that Lucas had to invent plot points so that Kenobi would be of use. For instance, when the characters board the Death Star, when the Millennium Falcon lands on the Death Star, Kenobi has to deactivate the tractor beam so the Falcon leaves. I can see that not being included in the initial script. So when Lucas informed Guinness about it, Alec was initially hesitant about that development. He didn't appreciate the fact that he would give himself up entirely to being a ghost, openly sacrificing himself. Lucas was able to sway Guinness that killing the character off would be better off for the movie, and Alec Guinness eventually acquiesced to that and saw the logic in what Lucas was trying to tell him. Now, later reports state that Guinness was the one who came up with the idea of killing off Kenobi because he couldn't stand the dialogue he had to say anymore. I do believe Lucas's side on this more. Just the reasoning seems more logical to me. Now, the last note on production that I think tells something of Kenobi's character is the fighting style he employs when he faces Vader on the Death Star. The choreography was arranged by Peter Diamond for the duel. It was a bit challenging. Lucas wanted to develop this special style that was between broadsword combat, so with traditional curved sabers where you do a lot of slashing, and epee fencing where it's a lot of stabbing and pointing. So it was a cross between that. So it was this new style that both Alec Guinness and David Prowse had to learn over the course of a couple of days. They both trained for that one day of filming. There were difficulties in filming the sequence. It took longer than expected. So that difficulty can be seen in that sequence. It's a very slow-paced fight. It's something that eventually was altered over the course of the next two Star Wars movies. I do think it's important to note when it comes to Guinness's performance in the character of Obi Wan Kenobi that there was this combat style that would appear to be archaic in a way, and it comes from a different era altogether than the setting of Star Wars Episode 4. Now we're going to move on to the character/performance notes. I'm going to start off with a quote here from Alec Guinness. He said, "The character had a touch of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It was a rather simple outline of a good man who had some magical powers. It was an adventure story about the passing of knowledge and the sword from one generation to the next." He even said as much in this video that I will play now.
There are suggestions there in the script. George Lucas suggested to me something of a samurai warrior in one way, hence Kirsten's partly dressed like this. Something of a wise man, a kind of monk-like character. And I think that there have been, not borrowings obviously, but a suggestion from Tolkien's books of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings.
So what I can pick up from here is that Alec Guinness perceived Kenobi as this morally simple man. He does the right thing without much of a second thought. Morally simplistic, you could say. I don't interpret this as him saying that the character didn't have much nuance to it, more so that it's morally simplistic. Going off that comparison to Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, Obi-Wan in Episode 4 appears more wizard-like than he does in any following movies. He has this pointed hood with the robe he has on. You have that image of him, but I don't think Kenobi is as eccentric as Gandalf. He's more contained in his performance. It's more of Alec Guinness's, what he brings to the character, his style of acting, which I will touch up on in a moment here. Then I have a quote from George Lucas moving on. He states, "When the cranky old man pulls out his laser sword and cuts down 3 guys in a second, that's when he realizes the old man is a master. The guy's a lot more than you think he is." So he may appear to be this simple old man that you don't think much of, but there's much that is contained and hidden. This is complemented by Alec Guinness's acting style. This minimalist approach also pertains to Obi-Wan's dwelling in the movie. Obi-Wan's dwelling is sparse. There are some furs and wall hangings along with some furniture. John Barry, who is the production designer, worked within the budget, but the simpleness of Kenobi is reflective in the decor. Then Alec Guinness would go on to state, I try to make them uncomplicated. I'm cunning enough to know that to be simple carries a lot of weight. The laser sword seems to be a marvelous weapon. It's rather like a Japanese sword with a row of laser buttons. But I must confess, I'm pretty much lost as to what is required of me, what I'm supposed to be doing. I can't really say. I simply trust the director. So along with this simpleness and uncomplicated manner in which Kenobi acts, there's also a modesty here that is reflective in the character. Obi-Wan Kenobi is not one to boast about his abilities or his experiences. It's all very much under the surface. He's just this very laid-back persona. I do think that this was Alec Guinness's personality as well, rubbing off on the character. At least that's what my interpretation of what he is saying and what Lucas is saying culminates into. Also, a fun fact, Alec Guinness improvised a line, "You must do what you feel is right," of course, at the end of the scene in Obi-Wan's dwelling where they discuss the Force. So Alec Guinness is a very experienced actor, and even though it may seem that he was unsure of what the meaning of the dialogue was, it doesn't appear to be that way on the surface. Very confident in himself and ability to convey what George Lucas is trying to communicate here. Last bullet point I have with the character and performance notes, Alec Guinness thought that his reaction to the destruction of Alderaan was cliched. He reeled backward, clutching his forehead. It's something that Ewan McGregor would emulate years later in Revenge of the Sith, so you have that trademark expression of Kenobi's where he's, stroking the beard and has that posture of contemplation, which we do see McGregor implement in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and then also in the miniseries Obi Wan Kenobi. So there's a lot of behaviors, physical performance aspects that Guinness would employ here that would go on to play a part in how Ewan McGregor would portray the character. So that's interesting to note right there. Here we are at the last section of the video, why I believe Alec Guinness is iconic as Obi Wan Kenobi, should be included more in the discussion when it comes to the character, and ultimately why he's underappreciated. So obviously there are many aspects of the character that are introduced by Guinness. They would go on to play a significant factor in Kenobi's character in prequel movies, the miniseries, and also the Clone Wars shows, both the micro series and the 3D CG animated series that would have come out in 2008. Kenobi was voiced by James Arnold Taylor, who does a fabulous job in that part. So there's some qualities here that Guinness introduces, such as there's a subtle sense of humor, there is a sage-like stoicism that he carries, he has also a gentle authority, he's very quiet, laid back, but you can tell there's this power and authority that comes with it. There's a contained eccentricity in there as well. He's very confident, faithful, trusting in the Force that there will be a positive outcome. He's very unflappable in negotiation. For example, when Han Solo gives his price of 10,000 credits, Kenobi's like, "We can pay you 2,000 now, plus 15 once we reach Alderaan." He's like, "Yeah, I'll negotiate with you. I'll meet your price and more so. I don't know where we're going to get the money from, but I have faith that there's going to be a good outcome here." So the negotiation aspect of the character is also seen in Star Wars Episode 4. So there's so many sides to the character that Guinness conveys very expertly here. My next point is Alec Guinness's acting style served the character very well. There's a stiff upper lip, that British mentality where you don't show much by overacting. There doesn't appear to be much taking place, but in the eyes there's so much activity going on there. Alec Guinness employs so many eye movements, so many subtle signs of deep vulnerability and melancholy. It seems as if there is nothing going on, but there's a whole another world that is just behind the surface of his face, and those very brief glimpses of it would take a very great actor to pull off. So you got to give them props for that. Those instances of melancholy happen on a number of occasions in the movie. It's most evident when Kenobi references Anakin Skywalker. This happens in the scene where Luke and Kenobi are discussing the Force in Obi-Wan's hut, when the subject of Anakin's friendship is brought up, where he says, and he was a good friend. You have that sad eye movement that he employs before he changes the subject quickly and brushes it off. There's also that vulnerability scene when he confronts Vader, when Vader states that Kenobi shouldn't have come back. There's a single shot that is just so powerful. Guinness's face is just conveys so much. There's this deep look of sadness there that's, I think, really earned him that Best Supporting Actor Oscar nomination in 1978. There's also that scene when Obi-Wan watches the message that Leia has recorded, and Kenobi, you really see him appreciating the gravity of the situation, and there's so much weight that is placed on his shoulders in that sequence where he was more lighthearted before. In that moment, you see all those years of sadness and depression in those very brief moments there. One thing I didn't mention before is that Alec Guinness brought this vulnerability to the character. It's very evident in that same sequence where Guinness says, "I'm getting too old for this sort of thing." So that right there tells you a lot about Kenobi's character. He's very aware of his flaws and his weaknesses, and there's no ego to the man. He just says, "Look, I know I'm getting older here. I don't have my youth anymore. You need to come help me and join the fight." So that's something that's very admirable, I believe, in both fiction and in real life. And I think that's one of the reasons why Obi Wan Kenobi is so endearing, is that he's a very humble man. He doesn't have much ego to bruise, and will admit when mistakes happen, so it's very human for that monk-like character. So, to wrap up, Alec Guinness puts in a very powerful performance here, even though he would go on to regret playing Kenobi just because of the fame that followed him, and he was afraid that he would always be remembered as Kenobi in none of his other roles, which I assure you isn't true. He was a fantastic actor. He was in so many great films, and he put in so many fantastic performances. I do think Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi is the epitome of the mentor character in fiction. He's one of the best examples, on par with Gandalf in my opinion, and maybe even surpassed Gandalf in some instances when it came to his humanity and flappability, his faith, and with that aspect of the negotiator. Okay, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you guys all got something from this video. There will be other videos coming out fairly soon. I'm wrapping up my second semester of grad school, so I should be done with that and free to do more of these videos. So subscribe for that, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
You feel working with actors or robots as actors present any special problems for you?
It seemed to me to present far more problems for the robots.